We should have got answer D on this one. If you look at the table that we're working off of on page 566, the left-hand side says a 4 by 4 by 12 modular brick. There's going to be 3 per square feet of wall. 8 times 3 is 2,400. 2,400 times 3 is 7,200 brick. The mortar's a little more complicated. I didn't tell you how thick the bed joint is, but I told you earlier, always assume a 3/8 if you're not told. So we assume a 3/8. We go to the middle of the page. It says a 3/8 inch joint with a 4 by 4 by 12 brick is 3.69. Make sure you can find that. Cubic feet of mortar per 100 square feet of wall. So it's 2,400 square feet of wall. It'd be 24 times 3.69. So we're going to work it out just like this. 8 times 300 times 3 is 7,200 brick. 24 divided by 100, 24 times 3.69, 89 cubic feet of mortar. The answer is D. There you go. You can do this. You can do this. Let's continue on in the walkers. We're going to go to page 570 and we're going to talk about a brick cavity wall at the top of page 570. Let's read that third paragraph on page 570 under brick cavity walls. In place of the usual header courses, the inner and outer widths of a cavity wall are connected by rust-proof metal ties. Now they're usually 3/16 of an inch in diameter. They're square on the end. They're Z-bars. And we're going to place them in every 6th course and 3 foot on center horizontally. There you go. Let's go to 573. You have all different types of joints on page 573. These are brick joints, so make sure that you can identify those on page 573. I've got struck joint highlighted. We're going to jump over to page 638. Tell you what, let's stop on page 621 on our way to 638. 621. Tell you what, back up just a little bit. Got a couple that I'm skipping here. 602. Let me get you on page 602. Apologize for that. Because you might get a question on how much it's going to cost to build a building. How much more is it going to cost when you get up higher and higher? Well, where it says miscellaneous masonry costs on page 602, labor costs on high buildings. On buildings over 10 to 12 stories high, it will be necessary to add an extra allowance for labor handling and hoisting the bricks and mortar. The higher the building, the longer it takes the hoist to make the trip from the street level to the floor on which the bricks are being laid. In return, extra work raising and handling, scaffolding, etc. Taking a 12-story building or 120 feet in height as normal or 100%, add 1% to the labor cost for each story or each 10 feet in height above the 120-foot level. So, for instance, a 12-story building or 120 feet in height is 100. The 13th story is 101, the 14th story is 102, and so forth. So that's how you calculate. The table at the bottom is probably the best one to use. For instance, if you're doing a 20-story building, you're going to add what percent? 8%. That's where you want to go with that. Now I want to go to, let's see here. Now I want to go to page 614. We already saw this earlier, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. There's a table at the, we talked about 1.125 being how many CMUs it would take to fill a square feet of wall. We highlighted the third one from the bottom, which is the 7 5/8 by 7 5/8 by 15 5/8 on that table on page 614. We flipped over to page 616, and this is a table which tells us how much labor it's going to cost. So let's find 7 5/8 by 7 5/8 by 15 5/8. That's our standard CMU. It's 8 inches thick. And how many lightweight units per 8-hour day can one mason erect? 150 to 170. Now be aware, read above the table, this is one mason and one laborer. So you got one mason and one laborer, or hod carrier they call it. So that's going to be the production. What do you have to do to that number if it's heavyweight units? Look at the bottom of the table.
225 to 250?
You're on page 616?
At 10%, 617.
Yeah, go to 616. We're on 616. Yeah. Add 10%. Right. Add 10%. It's interesting that you were looking on page 617, because that's the same information on 617. It just looks like it's a little more. There's more there than on 616. Same type of information though. Let's jump over to page 659. Tell you what, back up to 657. 657. Got something I want you to see on page 657 at the bottom. There's a table at the bottom. Just above that table, there's a paragraph, the cost of handling and setting adhesion type ceramic veneer. On most jobs, adhesion type ceramic veneer is delivered to the job in trucks, must be carefully unloaded, stored, protected in advance of the setting. 2 laborers should do this work at a rate of 360 to 400 square feet per 8-hour day. There you go. 2 laborers. Now this is the unloading. Okay. In the table it talks about the labor, the mason, the helper, the cost per 100 square foot, and actually setting it. So the table is a little bit different. The table is actually installing it. The paragraph we read is just about unloading it. So you might have to use that table to do a calculation. And you should be pretty good at looking at these tables nowadays. So far. We're getting real good at reading these tables and walkers, right?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, we are. Let's see what page we're going to go to next in walkers. We're going to go to page 723. 723. If we get a question about a steel angle, now in the real world we probably call this angle iron, but the technical word for it is a steel angle. If we get a question about a steel angle, and it says it's a 2 by 2 by 3/16, how much does that weigh a linear foot?
2.44 pounds.
2.44 pounds. That's at the bottom of page 723, about 4 up from the bottom. 2 by 2 by 3/16. Watch that carefully. Watch it carefully. Let's go to 733. Second to the last paragraph. When steel joists are used in fireproof construction, it is necessary to place a 2 to 2.5 inch reinforced concrete slab over the joists.
What page?
733, second to the last paragraph is what I have highlighted. When steel joists are used in fireproof construction. Let's go to 748. We're going to be estimating some wood joists at the bottom of 748. The third to the last paragraph says estimating wood joints in bold print. When estimating wood joists, always allow 4 to 6 inches on each end of the joist for bearing on the wall. That's a good plan. Page 775. 775. We got a little information about wood trusses here. In the middle of the page, the paragraph reads, wood roof trusses are used for spans as short as 25 feet, can be used up to 200 feet. Next paragraph, when using wood trusses, it is common to span the shorter dimension of the building. Sure it is. On page 779 and 7, it actually starts on page 777. There's all these types of roof trusses. 777, it starts off with Belgian flat top. 778 and 779, we've got all these pictures, diagrams. We have some more text which describes the different types. And at the bottom of page 780, I want you to highlight the scissors truss. I think this is supposed to be in bold print, but it's not. And that's why certain people like to ask you about the scissors truss, is because it's not in bold print and it's hard to find. It gives a little description as the scissors truss, and at the top of page 781 we're told in the second line that because there is no horizontal bottom cord or tie between the bearing points, the scissors truss develops movement at its bearing points when under a load. You can kind of look at some of those pictures and look at a scissors truss if you feel real strongly about it. We're going to go to page 836 otherwise, and we're going to look at Glulam beam construction on page 836. Glulam beam construction. Second paragraph. They are made in uniform or tapered shapes. In the beam shapes similar to the illustration, they can be used in spans from 20 feet to 80 feet. Let's go to the bottom of page 836, about halfway down the page that is, and there's a discussion of your glue laminated 3-hinged arch. Just be able to find that. You may get a question about that someday.
What was it? I'm sorry.
Glue laminated 3-hinged arch, about halfway down on page 836. I want you to go to page 933. On page 933, there's a table. A table we need to be real familiar with. All right. If we look at a plan and we see the dimensions of a roof, can we just take those measurements off the plan view and use those to calculate? No. What do we have to adjust for?
You gotta adjust for your slope.
You got to adjust for your rise and
Rise
run,
and
right?
Right.
Okay. That's what this table is all about. This is these are our adjustment factors. It's called our flat area factor. For instance, if you look at the overhead here, we have a diagram of a roof. And we want to know how many squares of shingles will be needed. So what we have to do is we have to take this area, and which is fairly easy to figure out, and we have to multiply it by a factor that is indicative of a 7 and 12 rise and run. If we look at our table, what number do we have to multiply by if it's a 7 and 12?
1.158.
1.158. So, and we know how many square feet are in a square?
100.
100 square feet in a square. So knowing all that information, take a minute and tell me how many squares of shingles we're going to need to do this roof. The question did not ask for waste, so we're not gonna add waste. All we're gonna have to do is just round up to the nearest whole square. How many squares do we need to do that roof?